Oops. Good morning. Right, we're reading from James chapter 3, and in the church Bibles it's page 1214, 1214. James chapter 3, and we're reading verses 1 to 12. Taming the tongue. Not many of you should presume to be teachers, my brothers and sisters, because you know that we who teach will be judged more strictly. We all stumble in many ways. Those who are never at fault in what they say are perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they're so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants them to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed, and have been tamed by human beings. But no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue, we praise our Lord and Father, and with it, we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives, or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. This is the word of the Lord.
So it's always a real joy to come here and see so many people with so much grounding in faith. It's always a challenge for me, as well as a real privilege. And I want to start by picking up on something Graham said right at the beginning. So yes, we were dancing yesterday. What many of you will not know is that I am an international award-winning dancer. I was going to say, you stole on my line. Now, the observant among you yesterday wouldn't have thought that is true. But we was on holiday in Greece a few years ago with our daughters. And down by the pool one night, they had a dance contest. And it was me against a French bloke. Now, if truth be told, the French bloke was a better dancer. But I used this. So I'd spoken to everybody who was English at the resort. And when it come to voting, guess who won? Now, we're reminded in this passage that we can use the tongue for damaging things. We can also use the tongue quite creatively. And I want us to think about both of those aspects of this passage today. Probably one of the most destructive things I've ever said wasn't the most hurtful. That's been said to me. Now, here's a picture of me with a cannon pointing towards my head. I took this in Geneva. And the reason I took this photo was because it reminded me of something somebody once said to me. I used to be a probation officer and then a senior probation officer. And as a senior probation officer, I never really got to see my clients anymore, unless they had a complaint to make against one of my staff members. So one day I'm called down to see this person, and he is fuming, absolutely fuming, spouting out all sorts of stuff. And he said to me that he was so angry, he was going to get a cannon and blow me up. Very difficult not to laugh at that point, which I think would have provoked him to hit me. But in my head, I'm thinking, well, number one, if you can find a cannon. Number two, if you can transport it to the office. And number three, if you know how to use it, then I'll tell you what, take a shot, because that's a good effort. And obviously I didn't say that. When I used to do gang stuff in schools and I told the kids that, they said, oh, that's a threat to death. It's like, it clearly wasn't a threat to death. It was somebody who was frustrated and sounding off. Now, a few years before that, a long time ago actually, I was a trainee church minister. And the most hurtful thing ever said to me was something that the pastor of the church said to me then. And do you know what he said? It wasn't going to kill me. It wasn't going to do anything like that. He said, Dave, you're unteachable. Now, that lodged in my head, and it come out during a counselling session 20 years later. And then I understood what he meant was, Dave, you're not doing what I'm telling you to do. We have to be really careful with our words, because our words seep into us and they seep into others. And they can be both creative and fun and amazing, but they can also destroy. And that's why we need to take this passage really seriously. Now, the way I want to do it is I want to start at the end. I'm going to start at the end with the problem of the tongue, because it's not actually a problem of the tongue. And so we're going to see that in the passage. Then I'm going to step back to verses 3 to 6, and we're going to think about the power of the tongue, the influence it has on us and the world. Then I'm going to look at the implications, coming back to the start of the passage, which will make it a bit clearer. And finally, how do we respond to this? Because, as somebody who's a theologian, ideas are impressive and they're interesting. But if we don't do anything with them, we might as well not bother having them. So I want us to go away with some really practical stuff. So let's look at this second half of the passage, hopefully. Yay, it's gone. I was worried then I might have to do one of my international dances. Here's my sermon reduced to, I used to say a tweet, but now it's called X, and it's all gone a bit weird. But in a world of sound bites, we need to rethink the nature of our words, because our words are reflective and creative, and they go deep, and they last a long time. And we live in a world where people come out with these little phrases. You know, I could probably announce a few, like build the wall, get Brexit done, whatever else we might want to think of. A lot of them come to mind, don't they? But what do they actually mean? We need to think that we don't get caught into that too, and just use sound bites, even holy sounding sound bites, that actually are going to impact people for eternity. So the problem of the tongue, I want to first of all start with this first part, being tamed and being tamed by mankind. And then I want to go into those phrases there. The reason I want to start with this part of the passage is because when James is writing this, James is versed in the Pentateuch. He's versed in his Hebrew scriptures. And you might have noticed this phrase here about no human can tame the tongue, but they have tamed birds, reptiles and sea creatures. It's a bit of a weird thing to say, isn't it? But not for James, because James has this framework in the back of his head of Genesis. So when we sort of think about Genesis, in Genesis 1:28, God says, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground." So there's definitely something in this where James is thinking about the tongue and thinking about how we've been set a task which does involve a bit of speaking, because we are to be stewards over the earth. But we don't get it right. We can't tame the tongue, but we can tame the rest of the world. Now I'm going to suggest to you, the reason is because it's not a problem of the tongue. This is a reflection of the fact that what we're talking about here is a far deeper spiritual problem. It's a problem of sin. That we have been given an immense task, and yet we can't even do the small things so often. We can't even control what we say so often, because our efforts are not going to be big enough. Now there's a solution to this. The solution is we work with God, and God can do it. What we can't do, God can. And in those second little bunt of verses, in 9 to 11, I want to say this as well, because Genesis, the verses before that, 26 and 27, say this. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and birds in the sky, over the livestock and the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God didn't say nothing, did he? God speaks and stuff comes into being. We're made in the image of God, so we're left with that challenge too. When we speak, stuff comes into being. That's why words like "you're unteachable" are so powerful, because they start to form things in you and they shape you. And I'm sure every single one of us will have had words of encouragement and words that have hurt over the years. But they're redeemable. Things can change. When God speaks, better stuff comes into being. And God leaves us with that challenge, that actually we're not here to say nothing. When we was praying earlier, we see stuff happening in our nation, we're not to say nothing. When we see injustice around us, or we see people who are hurting and in despair and lacking Jesus, we're not to say nothing. We can't play it safe, is another way of putting it. So what we've got to do is we've got to speak, and we've got to speak creative power into being, whilst recognising if we do it in our own strength, we're probably going to get it wrong. So we have to cooperate with the Spirit. Saying nothing isn't an option. You can't play the Christian life safe. You have to take a chance. You've got to be creative. You've got to allow the Spirit to move us forward. And you think about it, if we said nothing, we wouldn't even praise God, would we? So we'd be missing out ourselves on some of those experiences which are so formative. So when James is talking about the tongue, there's this whole paradox of talking about the tongue as being part of the formation of speech, but actually talking about the tongue as being representative of a much deeper spiritual problem of sin. And this is the paradox that we're looking at in this passage. That's why it says, "My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can salt spring produce fresh water." This is sin and salvation, isn't it? It's that we are sinful, fallen people. And yet, God uses us. And yet, God can give us the words to say which will change lives. This brings us back a little bit in the passage to these metaphors that James uses in verses 3 to 6. And I want to just highlight each of the metaphors, because each of them actually has a quite interesting application when you think about it. Because if we can speak these words into being, who are they for? Well, the first metaphor is of the horse. So it's about turning the horse. You put the bit in the mouth and the whole horse turns. Now, if you think about that, what is effectively James is saying here is that the words affect the individual subject. We could see it as being like the words I say affect how I live. There's a great song by Sam Fender where he talks about the echo chamber of social media. It's not just social media though, it's our friends. We have this echo chamber of words which we say to each other, and they shape how we live. So we as individuals get impacted by the words that we use. But we take other people along with us. Think about this metaphor of the rudder. So the metaphor in the first place was the tongue, a tiny tongue in a horse, being able to change the whole direction of the horse. That our tongue can change our direction. The ship metaphor, a tiny rudder, big ship, masses of wind, pushing it along, the little rudder changes its course. It doesn't just change the course for the individual, the captain, does it? It changes the course for everybody who's on the ship. So our words don't just impact on us, but they impact on the people around us who we're taking with us. It's sort of one of the reasons, isn't it, why he says that teachers are going to be judged more harshly, but we're going to come back to that. So not only do our words impact us, but they impact the people that we care about and who are journeying with us in life. But it don't even just stop there. He has a third metaphor of the forest fire, of a spark. Now, I try to find a picture of my fires because I love making fire. Yes, if there's ever an attack. I love fires, and I build them so that they are really big. I'm wondering whether I should say this in front of a former fire officer. But it starts with a tiny little match. A tiny little match. In fact, there's another lyric from another song from the 90s about it takes one match to burn 1,000 trees, and it takes 1,000 trees to make a match, or something like that, from the Manic Street Preachers. But this tiny little spark can create nation-changing, world-changing events. Think about the forest fires that people have in places like Australia, in America, and places like that. I'm sure lots of other places. Tiny little sparks make national changes. Our words are like those little sparks, aren't they? Sometimes we can say something and it massively changes people's lives. But our words can change nations. That's where this Genesis stuff comes in as part of the theology of this passage. God spoke into being. Our words speak into being. So we know from this ending of the passage that the tongue represents something much bigger in terms of our experience. It is our words, but it's much deeper than that. And we can see that our tongue has power not only on us, but on everything. So what we are sort of looking at here is a whole system approach, if you like. When we're talking about the words we use, they're coming up from something much deeper. And no matter how hard we try, if it's only effort that's controlling our words, we're going to get it wrong. Because we're fallen people. So our whole being, our whole mind, our whole society will be shaped and formed through our interaction with the Spirit. So let's look at these implications. These next 2 points are not as long. But the first one, he is talking to people who are teachers. So I have to take this very seriously when I get up and speak in front of you, because my words are being shared with you and they're going to have an impact. But actually we are also all to be informed by this passage. He says, my fellow believers. So that's all of us. We're all got to be conscious of the implications of the words that we speak, because we all have influence not only over ourselves but over other people. And it says about being judged. And there's two aspects of this. There's the now and the future. It's one of those classic eschatological aspects. We will be judged in the future at a judgment day for the words that we've said and the impact they've had. But we will rightly be judged now. Now, if I come up here and spoke a load of rubbish, and hopefully I haven't done that this morning, I will hope that you would tell me that. And that might feel like I'm being judged, but I need that judgment to make sure that I change. So judgment isn't necessarily a bad thing, and we do experience it now as well as in the future. And also people need to experience judgment now for some of the stuff they say, because of the impact it has on others. So it is for all of us. And as somebody who teaches the Bible, I have to be very conscious, but as all of us, as people who are speaking the Bible into being in our lives, we all have that same responsibility. So how do we respond? We all stumble. We all make mistakes. Here's our final part. Now that could lead us to think, okay, I'll say nothing. It's one of my brother-in-law's sayings. He goes, not getting involved, not saying anything. But it don't work not saying anything. Here's a Pink Floyd lyric for you. It's actually voiced by Stephen Hawking on the Division Bell album. It doesn't have to be like this. All we need to do is make sure we keep talking. Now, he's talking about a silence. It's speculated it's a silence between Roger Waters and David Gilmour. But it doesn't really matter. That's part of it. But that's not the full story, is it? Stephen Hawking is a genius. But actually, that's not the full story. We don't just need to keep talking and not say anything. But we need to allow God into our hearts to form and shape those words, so those words have ripples and impacts beyond our lives and into the lives of our communities and our universe. Because words created everything. So it's not an absence, but it's the grace of Christ that we have to rely on in our speech. We have to just come back time and time again to lean in further and further into Christ. And as we do that, the impact it should have is that we don't just have sound bites, even holy sound bites, but we live with words of power and transformation and hope. And I want to leave it there for you to think about.